G'day, IB Psychologist. My natural disposition is to be somewhat of a jumped up prick, a little bit like too aggressive and assertive, and I get too wound up over little things, a bit like Jordan Peterson. I'd much rather be like Jonathan Haidt, where he's just always mellow and calm and collected. So I tried to channel my Jonathan Haidt and find 5 things I love about this new IB Psychology guide, because there are a lot of challenges, there's a few big questions, but let's focus on the positives first. Number 5. Learning outcomes are back. Thank you. Hallelujah. How great. How do we ever get a curriculum that doesn't actually tell teachers, here's what you're supposed to teach about that topic? Well, we didn't in the previous guide. We just had topic titles. And for experienced teachers, that was fine. But my heart really went out to new teachers who just looked at the titles and thought, well, what am I supposed to teach about that? Now, a bit of history, the curriculum before, back in 2009, that one had learning outcomes. But what happened was students were just memorizing and pre-writing exam answers, and some unscrupulous teachers were selling every essay to every possible learning outcome and just encouraging students to memorize them. And so they got away with the learning outcomes, and that kind of tried to, I guess, deliberately make the questions hard to predict, but it also makes it hard to teach. So I'm so grateful to see that the learning outcomes have come back in the course. Now, predictability in assessments, that's a difficult balancing act. And I quite like this idea of the concepts, these 6 concepts coming into the assessment. You want to have a predictable assessment because your assessment and curriculum should be perfectly aligned, right? What you're assessing is what you've told me I should teach. But there has to be an element of unpredictability to genuinely assess critical thinking. Critical thinking should be unique, unrehearsed, off the cuff, individualized. Like, it should be the student's own thinking that they can come up with on the fly, not pre-written. And so this idea of the unpredictability about the 6 concepts in relation to the paper 1 essay, I actually really like that idea. And I think it will clearly distinguish students that can transfer ideas across contexts to just those that can factually recall. Now, Jordan Peterson on my shoulder here, I'll try not to get too fired up, but I do just think we've erred too far on the side of too much content. So all of those concepts, they're abstract ideas, but in order to write about them, you actually have to have quite a detailed content knowledge. So I think there's probably a lot to do especially the standard level course, to teach the research methodology content for the concepts, plus the 4 context topics, but there are ways around that. So I'll share that in good time. Now, number 3, command terms. How do I loathe thee? Let me count the ways. Now, I apologize if you've heard me talk and rant and rave about command terms for a long time, but what a win, and thank you so much, IB, for removing any mention of the command terms from the marking rubrics in this new guide. It took me many years to realize they were a massive big red herring. You had one verb at the front of a question, and you had the whole rest of the bloody question that was way more important, which everyone seemed to ignore. In actual fact, this rest of the question is psychology. This is what we're teaching. The difference between outline and explain. Who gives a toss? So it's really nice now. And also the new guide settles that debate about, is a discussion different to an evaluation? There's a certain page in there where they're talking about the unseen case study, where they explain discussion and evaluation mean the same thing. So hallelujah, all of us who were screaming from the rooftops that those 2 things meant the same thing. Now, talking about red herrings, I have a prediction that the concepts will become the next big red herring in this course. Now, I might be wrong. I have to realize that I could be wrong. I probably am wrong. In future videos, I'll explain why I think we shouldn't put concepts at the front of our course. We should put them at the back. I actually think they're not going to be as important in the assessment as 80% of other things. And I think focusing them on too early, too much, I think it's going to detract from a good psychology course. You know, I don't want to stand up the front of, I don't want to teach bias, measurement, causality, change, perspective, responsibility. Right? I want to teach neurotransmission, the brain, right? Culture. Like, why do we do the things we do? Like that, I want to teach psychology. I'll explain in future videos and blog posts exactly why I think that will be the best approach for assessment as well. Now, talking about content, look, we love teaching psychology because we want to teach cool stuff that one day these kids are going to use. And so if you like the content from your previous course, I think there's some great news that we haven't had a massive overhaul. Most of what we can teach in the old course, we can teach in this one. We might have to teach some new stuff because there's now no options. It's 4 contexts that we must teach. Although if you're standard level, you could probably drop development because they get the choice for the essay, so you don't really have to teach that one if you're stuck for time. But content's pretty much the same. Now we've got some new content, which it's great to see operant and classical conditioning in the new guide. I mean, they should be in every introductory psychology course, right? Emic and etic concepts come back after a hiatus. Not my favorite topics. Social cognitive theory has gone back to social learning theory and appears everywhere in the guide, it seems, about 5 different places. But anyway, the point being, it's still good psychology content. So we've got to take that and appreciate that. Now, the number one thing, you've got to hear me out here, right? High stakes exams. If you've been teaching IB Psychology for a few years, AP Psychology, A-level, and you're used to high stakes exams, it's very easy to take them for granted. I've been lucky to have the perspective in New Zealand where in level 2 psychology, so this is the second to last year of high school, so 11th grade, in psychology, all internal assessments, so no exam. Last year I had 0 work moderated externally, just internally by a colleague. I get to choose the nature of the assessment. If it's a test, a research paper, an interview with grandpa, I can completely choose the assessment context and type. The rubrics are about 3 sentences long, sometimes with a couple of phrases, distinguishing low and high, fail to highest marks. There's no fully published rubrics or prescribed content to teach. Now, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, that sounds like a dream. And I thought it was. It's a really high trust model in New Zealand. It's like, hey, look, we trust you teachers to teach your stuff. So presume positive intent. That's the good place this curriculum comes from. But it just lacks a sense of urgency. I have to find myself embedding in a bit of false intensity to increase the academic rigor in my course. Now, you can argue maybe IB Psychology's moved too far in terms of putting academic demands on their students. But, I really love teaching kids to an exam because their exam performance is a reflection of my teaching ability. And so I've always got to find new ways of how do I make this interesting, engaging? How do I make it stick? How do I make good revision activities that they actually want to do, that are going to get the most out of their time without actually just putting it all back on them and going, yep, no, you just got to revise this in your own time, because if they did that across their 6 subjects, then they'd get burned out and washed out, right? How do I streamline my content so that I'm covering everything I need to, but in the most effective, efficient manner possible? Like, there's these loads of challenges with a lot of pressure, and pressure makes diamonds. So I don't think we should take for granted the role of high stakes exams in education to motivate students and also to motivate teachers to keep wanting to do better and to keep wanting to be better. All right. I'm curious to hear, what do you think? That's my best Jonathan Haidt taking a gratitude walk through this new guide, because it's very easy to overlook all the good things about IB Psychology and just focus on these new changes, which cause some big challenges, but they're not challenges that we can't overcome. All right. I hope that's helpful.